this did two things for Putin's point of view. One is it gave him this essentially open platform with no real tough questioning, except at the very end about this American journalist who's in prison in Russia, Evan Gershkovich. But apart from that, essentially, it was more or less, what would you like to talk about, Vladimir Putin? So he had his open platform, but also he knew that given Tucker Carlson's role within the whole Donald Trump universe, that this is also a way of essentially trying to both support Trump, but also ingratiate himself with Trump's people in the hope, presumably, that Trump is going to become the next president of the United States.
Now, let's look at a really important interview that took place, a controversial interview this week. This is President Putin. He spoke at length with the American broadcaster, former Fox News anchor, Tucker Carlson, and he said that the West needs to realize that it's impossible to defeat Russia in Ukraine. Now, it's fair to say that President Putin was not really questioned with a huge amount of veracity. But let's listen to a clip of him. Here's President Putin warning the US about getting involved in the war with Ukraine.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions.
Well, joining me now is Mark Galeotti, Russia Specialist Senior Fellow with RUSI and an Honorary Professor at UCL. Mark, welcome to the show. Good afternoon.
Hello there.
Well, look, that was a lengthy 2-hour interview. What did you make of it?
Well, when I basically managed to bring myself back to life, because it was a phenomenally tedious 2 hours as well, I mean, I think it was clear that although it was massively self-indulgent by Putin, when he said at the beginning that he'll spend 30 seconds to a minute talking about history and then spends a half hour on kind of digested lecture. But nonetheless, what comes out really are 3 points that did actually come up in that particular sort of extract. First of all, still trying to say we can make a deal with Washington, not with Kiev, but with Washington. But of course, a deal on our terms. Secondly, essentially saying that there is no way that Russia can lose, clearly trying to basically exacerbate those senses of Ukraine fatigue in the West. And thirdly, more or less pointing to all the other challenges. Remember, after all, this is not going to be watched on the whole in its entirety, but in little sort of curated sound bites on social media or on TV news. And that was clearly intended for the American conservative market. You've got troubles on your border rather than messing about in Ukraine.
And I mean, the other thing that's been commented about this, Mark, that was that basically Putin got sort of free rein. I mean, Frost Nixon, this was not. I mean, why was this a good thing for Putin to do? I mean, it felt like he was very much in control of the situation, and you know, this was a very useful platform for him.
Well, yes. I mean, although Tucker Carlson had said that no foreign journalists have bothered interviewing Putin, in fact, many have been wanting to interview Putin. But the point is, Putin's press team have always turned them down because they knew precisely that other journalists would actually be asking tough questions. From this point of view, I mean, really, this did two things for Putin's point of view. One is it gave him this essentially open platform with no real tough questioning, except at the very end about this American journalist who's in prison in Russia, Evan Gershkovich. But apart from that, essentially, it was more or less, what would you like to talk about, Vladimir Putin? So he had his open platform, but also he knew that given Tucker Carlson's role within the whole Donald Trump universe, that this is also a way of essentially trying to both support Trump, but also ingratiate himself with Trump's people in the hope, presumably, that Trump is going to become the next
Mm.
president of the United States.
I mean, it did feel that that was, I wouldn't even just say the subliminal message, that was a kind of a very primary message. It felt that this broadcasting opportunity really kind of was a message into American politics, and it was a message to sort of very much shore up Donald Trump.
Yeah, it was interesting that degree to which again he's basically playing back many of Donald Trump's own kind of talking points about the fact that he could end the war very quickly. The only way he could really do that is essentially by twisting the Ukrainians' arm and threatening to end all aid for them. Likewise, this emphasis on the national debt, on the Southern American border, that kind of thing. All of these are essentially just plucked from Trump's own rambling narratives and being repeated back by Putin. And it was almost all really directed towards American concerns. There was very little there that was actually directed towards European concerns. Again, from this point of view, this is, as he would see it, the leader of one superpower talking to another superpower over the heads of
Mm.
both the Ukrainians and the Europeans.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was on another show this week with a prominent sort of Trump advisor, stroke kind of, mouthpiece. And this was before the Putin Tucker Carlson interview went out. And you talked about the talking points. I mean, the talking points coming from this kind of Trump spokesperson were pretty much word for word to what Putin says, and this guy was making the argument like Trump is the only person that can stop this, and the Ukrainians are going to have to back down, and they're going to have to start getting into a dialogue with Russia, and they're going to have to concede some land. I mean, do you think that that is where? That's basically as far, would Trump go as far as that? Is that what we're going to see in the US elections coming up? This clear fault line emerging?
Look, I don't think that Trump's really going to be making any kind of direct claims of how he sees it ending, if he can possibly avoid it. He likes the grand declaratory statement rather than the policy detail. But the point is that we have to acknowledge that because last year's Ukrainian counteroffensive was a disappointment, there is an increasing sense, under the surface within both American and Western policy circles, that some kind of concessions might, in due course, not yet, but in due course, be needed to end the war. So, I mean, in this respect, it's not just that Trump is speaking to misgivings also in the West, but Putin is doing everything he can to maximize it because this is his best chance of being able to
Mm.
pull something that looks like a victory out of this. If he can hold on to some of, at least, of the territories he's occupied, he can turn to the Russian people and using the fact that all the media is state controlled, say, you see, we face the whole might of the collective West as well as Ukraine, and yet we still manage to take these territories which are historically Russian, according to his bizarre pseudo histories.
Mm. Well, look, Mark, always fascinating to speak with you. Thanks very much for your time. That's Mark Galeotti, Russia specialist there.